Good evening and welcome to the Cambridge Union on such a sunny day. Thank you so much for coming and sitting in our wonderful wood-lined chamber rather than sitting out in the sun enjoying yourselves. You know, there really must be something wrong with us all. Or the guest that we're with must just be so fantastic that he's well worth it, and I certainly agree with that. So we are honoured to have with us this evening the Vice-Chancellor of the university, who has said to me this evening that no topic of conversation is off limits, which is really rather exciting. So really there is only one question for me to begin with, which is, as your leadership, your premiership, your dictatorship, whatever you would like to call it, Vice-Chancellor, draws to a close, what is the naughtiest thing you've ever done?
Well, I'd love to say I ran through wheat fields, but where I was brought up, it was coal tips and slag heaps, and now, of course, they're all covered in grass because we have no jobs, no industry or anything else in South Wales, so I suppose the naughtiest thing I ever dreamt of doing was running through a wheat field.
Wonderfully pastoral and idyllic. Now, my notes for this event in our term card, available to all reputable Cambridge unions, suggest that this is the perfect event for students to understand the mysterious world of Cambridge's university administration. Have you found it to be a world of mystery in your time as Vice-Chancellor?
I think there are mysteries. The most mysterious thing are the statutes and ordinances of the University of Cambridge, which are a mystique in themselves, largely because they are inherently, intrinsically contradictory. And it's as if you can find an exception for every rule that exists within the statutes and ordinances. You can find something that contradicts it somewhere in them, because they are an evolution of a set of rules, mostly since the 1920s, and they've just been accreted over time. But the amazing thing about Cambridge is that while many other universities look at us and say this place is ungovernable, it's unworkable, the democratic processes in Cambridge, much as there are times when you're Vice-Chancellor you wish you didn't have to work within them, they're actually a very important break on the university. And the longer you are in post, the more you realize that in an academic institution, having democratic processes is actually very important, because of the myriad of views we all espouse and the chance to debate and discuss them. And the statutes do allow us to enable that to happen. Sometimes there are weaknesses to this, and the weaknesses are actually not internally imposed, interestingly, but externally imposed. That Cambridge, compared to other institutions, is not as quick or able to respond as quickly as is often demanded by external pressures. And then you have to extemporize and actually take decisions and then defend them afterwards, because I'm afraid governments and other agencies often dictate the timelines and not the university. Left to our own timelines, the statutes would serve us well.
So when you're speaking about external pressures, I'm not going to use the E word, I'm not going to talk about that just yet, but I mean, rest assured we're coming back to that at some point. What do you think the biggest pressures that face Cambridge going forward as a university are?
I think the biggest pressures are going to be fourfold. Let me stick with four. The first is going to be the competitiveness of the rest of the world. You know, we're an international university. The only game in town is where we stand globally. I'm not that concerned as to where we stand vis-a-vis other institutions in the United Kingdom.
Even that other institution?
Accuse me of arrogance, but really that's not the game. The game here is how do we actually stand and compare? We are faced with North American institutions like Harvard that have endowments of $30–40 billion. They are able to charge whatever they like for education. They don't go in for some of the long-held views that we have about egalitarianism or elsewhere. They're quite happy to be operating at that level. They can offer salaries to die for compared to what we can. So international competitiveness and remaining at the forefront is something that really matters. And the second area that we will face problems with, maybe not even in my successor's lifetime, is an ever-increasing tendency for those in government to wish to impose quotas, impose rules externally. And that will challenge our precept that we are very independent-minded, that we do our best to select the very best students wherever they may come from, try and support them, and give them every opportunity to thrive. For instance, if we started to have quotas and things imposed on us, then it makes, again, our own mission very difficult to work with. The third element is the estate. I mean, we were talking earlier, and you have also been having to think hard about the estate. There are parts of the university buildings, actually not the oldest buildings, but the buildings that go back to the 60s and 70s, which will have to be replaced. And therefore, there's going to be a large capex required in the medium term to sustain the university. That will have to come from philanthropy. So the last challenge is going to be, can we raise our game and to work hard to bring in resources into the university? But to do that, I believe we fundamentally have to be very true to our mission, to serve society, so that we can retain the trust of people in that helping Cambridge is actually helping to sustain something that's really valuable in our nationhood as the United Kingdom.
So there's something there that's really piqued my interest. Some of the buildings from the 60s and 70s are going to have to go. Can you confirm to the Chamber now that the raised faculty building at the Sidgwick site, maybe the ugliest building in the entire county, will soon be departing?
Well, believe me, I've worked in the NHS for a long time, and if you want ugly buildings, I can certainly match the raised building on the Sidgwick site.
I mean, I spent 4 months
It isn't the
working
one
in
that
the
actually has more difficulties. Oddly enough, if you happen to be a historian who has to live in the glass house at the top of the history building, which is almost uninhabitable in the summer, that was a lot later, but more uninhabitable than the raised building.
Well, in that case, I will just continue to wait with bated breath and hope that I manage to develop enough explosives by the time that I finish here to finally remove that. But
that's dangerous territory these days.
It's fine, we're not covered by Prevent here. You all enjoyed that one. So moving back to some of the other things you'd said as well. You talked about how we have to be worried about what is imposed externally upon the union. That's on the university. That's very true. Do you think that the university does enough and will continue to develop a program in order to be able to select the best and brightest from wherever they come from? Do you think we do enough with quotas so far?
So at the moment, all of the choices that we make are shared quotas but in the collegiate university. There isn't an imposition from the university. It is something particularly relating to admissions that all the colleges and the university agree on a particular position. There's a lot of debate and discussion, for instance, such as the offer agreements and things that we actually come to. And so far, all of the targets that we've identified have been ones that we've set for ourselves. The university prides itself that we have some of the best data relating to admissions, better than anything Bristol or any surveys, actually probably better than the UCAS data, in terms of understanding how we can best recruit students. The pressures and the capacity to restrict ourselves to putting less emphasis on the interview, in other words, using the interview more as a way of talking yourself in rather than talking yourself out into the area, is something that every year we will get the usual media coverage on this particular area. But the key thing is not to drop the standards at all that we expect of undergraduate entry, and potentially just as importantly for postgraduate entry. So these are really key elements for us. If, for example, we had a situation that would create the difficulty, would be a situation, for example, where we had, let's say, for example, Alan Milburn comes along and tells us, you will drop a grade for every student coming from a poorer area in the United Kingdom, as defined by himself. That is going to start creating problems about the independence of choice that we actually have related to admissions. Secondly, the challenges could also come externally on the basis that the undergraduate program here is probably the most expensive in the United Kingdom. Our supervision system operates in such a way that the current cost of an undergraduate year here is about 18,500 between the colleges and the university. We get 9,250 back if everything goes well with the TEF area, so barely half. My usual retort to the government is we pay for the remainder because we fundamentally believe in the education program that we have. I'm a staunch believer in the collegiate and the supervision system. I actually happen to think it's the right system as we go forward with better technology. But the main message to government is you don't pay for this education. We pay for it out of the proceeds of our endowments, the colleges and the university endowments, and therefore we will reserve the right to choose who are the best candidates to undertake that.
So that's really interesting, because one of the things that I think is levied so often at the university from some of the students is that this feels very much more like a university that is catering to the grads, and that often people feel that sort of one of the easy things one can say about supervisors is that they're rather annoyed even that they have to supervise undergraduates, because they'd far rather be working with their postgrad students, be working on supervising PhDs.
Yeah.
Do you think that the fact that so much of the university's money goes into supporting undergrad education above and beyond what is paid for by people's fees is the ultimate retort to that the university does care as much about undergraduate education?
Well, I think that's a very interesting precept, because coming from Wolfson College as I do, our view there normally is that the university obsesses on undergraduates rather than postgraduates, and it's the postgrads who actually get the raw deal in the collegiate universities. So quite the opposite, I'm afraid, is the perspective from my college that we would look at. The truth is that it's somewhere in between. We are looking to expand the number of graduate students. We would like to get somewhere to parity between graduate students and undergraduate students. But what you have to understand with that cost of undergraduate education, the chance of being able to expand the undergraduate program is almost a non-starter. That's a quick-fire way to bankruptcy, or a wholesale increase in overseas students having to pay a lot more. But then the overseas students we would attract are those from very much richer backgrounds who could take it on. And that would also change the mix of students that we have within the university and the colleges. At the moment, we have a strong position in that our objective assessment of students is such that we can easily accept that 64% of our students from home and the EU would be state educated rather than privately educated, but all of that is based on the levels of attainment at A level. It's who gets 2 A stars and an A to get into the university here, and that is the red line that we have at the moment. If we break that red line, then I think we're going to have issues, because individuals are going to say, but I got the grades and I wasn't accepted, and somebody who didn't get the grades was accepted. And how you justify that without good objective evidence, I think, is going to cause problems downstream.
And I suppose the only thing you can do when you don't get the grades is hope that, like myself, there's a place waiting for you at Fitzwilliam when Magdalene sends you that crushing email on the day of your results. But I'm conscious that perhaps too much of me is being heard here this evening.
Well, I can only echo that, because my daughter went through exactly the same and also ended up in Fitzwilliam. So.
It's a great college. I'm very, very proud of it. But I'm conscious that perhaps too much of me is being heard this evening. So is there anybody from the audience that has a question for the Vice-Chancellor so far? Yes, just down here at the front. I'm sure we'll get to him. Oh, we'll go for that then.
What is the one thing, or the most important thing, that you would like to have done during your Vice-Chancellorship that you didn't do?
That's a good question. I think I would have liked to be able to move more quickly on a variety of issues. I'd like to probably have expanded the postdoctoral program in particular, and to get postdocs fully integrated into the university faster than it did happen. It is happening now. The colleges have recognized them, and it's brilliant that postdocs are now seen as academic fellows in the university rather than previously, if I use the sort of pejorative term of the research cannon fodder that made the university work. So that is something that was very important to me. And what I would have also liked to see is probably 1 or 2 changes in the governance of the university to actually bring it into line with where the original areas of governance were intended in 1923. So, for example, deciding on the rules that set Regent House membership, deciding on who actually votes and how many people can vote, how many people can call for a grace, and these sorts of areas, because some of those numbers are really very difficult at the present time. So there are some fundamental changes. Those changes will happen because there's a governance review going on at the present time, and in the usual way of Cambridge, we will have that. We will have our debates and discussions, and then move forward and make decisions. But in the main, it's mostly speed. I would have liked to have done all of this much faster and given myself 2 more years to do further things, which I would like to do, and that would be probably to continue to bolster our international presence, particularly in India, North America, and China.
Fantastic. And then, yeah, let's move it along the line.
Talking about endowments, especially in comparison with North American institutions, that might be a naive question, but I can imagine that most alumni would rather make a donation to a college than to the university or department. How is does the university suffer from most of the money going to colleges, or is there any agreement that?
No, that's a straightforward one to answer. No, the university doesn't suffer. I mean, I've often on platforms and talking about our philanthropic program. This is a really good campaign that we're running at the present time. We're aiming to raise, when I started, we just completed, I've raised the last 200 million of the 800th campaign. We closed that at 1.2 billion sterling, and very quickly went into a further campaign. The reason we went so quickly into a campaign was that we had the momentum to keep the collegiate university together, and this is a collegiate campaign. And that means that our target of £2 billion to be raised, and we've raised, as of today, something in the order of 875 million already halfway through, has happened. More or less split as we would anticipate, with a little bit more going, by 55% going to the colleges and 45% to the university, but it's the very different way of giving. So for me, £1 given to a college is £1 given to the collegiate university, so I really don't mind. The differences as to who gives where in the philanthropic campaign are, however, very interesting. What we know is that undergraduates in particular favour giving very much in the first instance to the colleges. Postgraduates tend to see themselves and identify themselves more with the university and departments. And once you get to postdocs and non-alumni, then it's very much the university that they tend to give. There was also an adage that I had from an alumnus of the university who gave a substantial sum to the collegiate university, was that they felt that if the sum was very large, that the university could make better use of it than the college. But now what we've been trying to do is to bring in linked appointments and schemes where we bring the college and the university together, so that a potential benefactor can feel that they can both reward their college and the university. And this is a big difference from the previous campaign. So the collegiate campaign, from my point of view, is going extremely well. The colleges are fantastic in how they've stepped up to the mark with the campaign. And it genuinely feels that every penny that we've had, whether to the college or the university, is there to ultimately to the benefit of the students and staff of the university.
Fantastic. And then we got any other questions? Yes. Just move the mic back one.
Thank you. As someone who works in college outreach and schools liaison, a lot of what I do is working to raise aspirations in schools, and I think that's a lot of what the university does, both centrally and on a college basis.
Absolutely.
And it's very important work. But it appears that there's more pressure for colleges and also the university as a whole to focus more on raising attainment in schools. And although this can be seen perhaps as a byproduct of raising aspiration, do you think it's feasible for the university to be able to do so? And do you think, just on a broader level, whether it's something that universities should be expected to do?
Let's answer the last first. No, I don't think it's something universities should be expected to do. And maybe the outcome of last Thursday probably dictates that we won't hear much more about it. The real issue that we've got here is, yes, we need to engage with schools. for the reason that you've said. We've got to increase aspiration, particularly in schools in poorer areas. One of the most interesting things that I've seen in the education program was work done by Anna Vignoles here in the Department of Education. And her study, which shows that as you look at attainment, at each of the stages from the age of 3 to the age of 18, and you plot them by parental income, what you actually have are flat lines across the area. We do not widen participation at all, nor do we improve attainment at all. From the age of 3 onwards, it's already, the die is cast. Tony Blair may get a lot of bad press, but he was right when he said early years education is what really matters. And the university has grasped this because we have a great faculty of education. It's actually one of the leading faculties in the world in this area, actually wants to look at understanding what can we do to raise the aspiration, not just of the children, but for them to start seeing education as fun, as really engaging. So I know the much parodied Lego professorship of play that we have here is a very important role. It's trying to understand how children begin to learn, how learning can be fun. And that, extending now through the university training school that we have at Northwest Cambridge, allows our faculty to really work with teachers. Let's remember one thing: the real experts about primary and secondary education are teachers and headmasters who really have to do the job. All we can do from the university is to help train them and educate them, support them, and do good research alongside them, such that we can begin to help government make the right policies that the vast majority can benefit with. And by that, I can be pretty open here. I don't believe resurrection of grammar schools and attainment targets in a single school is going to make the difference that I hope we will see by a general improvement in our standards of secondary education, where I do think we are lagging behind much of the rest of the world, and PISA scores and things show this very objectively, and that should be a real worry for government.
So we did get, so we did just get onto it, and the E word was used, or at least last Thursday at least was referenced. So what do you think, in this period of uncertainty that we're going into now, the phrase we keep seeing in the papers, what do you think the priorities of the university should be, and what should we focus on in a time where it is uncertain where more research funding is going to come from, how the university can react to potentially a succession of very short-lived governments with potentially very different ideas about university funding, for example?
Well, from my point of view, the most important thing for the university going forward is to have confidence in itself. Mm-hmm. Let's be clear, we are a very successful international organization. And do you know what? It might seem a little bit non-British to say it. We're good. We're actually damn good. And actually, we should be not prepared to say it, that we are there as an institution for others to learn from, as much as we're there to learn ourselves from others. So we need to approach engagement with government with a level of confidence that we have stood the test of time. We are internationally respected and well known, and therefore what we say is well meant to government of whatever colour. We can't pick and choose whichever governments we will have, but we need to engage with ministers in an objective way, never losing our objectivity, and advising them in the best way possible as to which policies they should look to develop for the university. The big thing on the horizon is, of course, Brexit. I'm sure you'd want to get onto that at some point.
It was coming at some point.
But it's a very important set of issues because it will impact on our competitiveness internationally. But above all else, we do a great job in terms of education. We want to be as open as possible, provided people have the ability to come and benefit from that education, and we should be saying that to government. At the other end, we should also engage with the debates that are going on and engage with the rest of the sector so that it's quite clear to government that we do have views on these matters. We can discuss those views with them, but we're not going to sway from our views depending on the political complexion of whoever's in power.
So we've done the election, we've touched on Brexit. There's only one figure left for me to do the holy trinity of union interviews with you. Given that you began by talking about North America and our relationship to universities over there, do you see anything in the way that the Donald speaks that's particularly interesting or dangerous for Cambridge or for higher education in general? Or how do you think his election and his presidency plays into the concerns of the university or indeed the wider community?
Oh, I see Donald Trump as a great opportunity for recruitment.
That's not an answer we've had before here, so I mean, I have to ask you to develop that.
You know, if you look at the publication in Science this week, and you look at his projected budget for the various research agencies, the federal research agencies, I mean, he is planning to cut them in a wholesale way. I mean, his plans for NIH, which obviously I look at very closely, is a drop from 33 billion to 26 billion. If you happen to be in the Environment Agency, it now sits with a budget of a big zero. You know, so there are many fantastic scientists, fantastic researchers in a whole range of disciplines in the United States, and I would say this is a great opportunity for us to see if we can attract some of the very best here to help us develop. So I'm afraid with every disaster that faces somebody, you know, Brexit might have been one for us. A bigger disaster awaits somebody else, and we've got to take advantage of it. So.
Well, you heard it here first. The wheel of fortune continues to turn, maybe in our favour with the Donald. So does anyone else have any other questions as we move along? Yeah. Do you want let's keep the mic going back. Why not? Oh, different one.
So during your time as Vice-Chancellor, would you say that there's one achievement in particular that you're most proud of in terms of helping reach out to the wider community, either within the UK or even globally?
Yeah, there are several that really do matter. I mean, for me, because of the international nature of postdocs, when I first came, I gave the first speech, and in my first speech on October the 1st, said the forgotten group in this university are the postdocs. There are 4,000 postdocs in this university, and they are largely a very international and very cosmopolitan group, and I'm really proud that we are now being very inclusive to them and making them feel part of the community. In terms of the wider world, I'm going to pick on one that might surprise you, and that's the Cambridge in Africa program. When we started, the Cambridge in Africa program was about £3 to £4 million. It is now £45 million. It has researchers from every part of the university engaging in collaboration with centres in Africa, supporting those African tertiary education centres and universities is something quite different. Most people, I've spent part of my time working in West Africa as a clinician. Most people get into Africa because of health and health-related research. We haven't. We've gone in because we believe that for countries in Africa, it is vital that we actually have universities that can speak out with the same freedom that we enjoy here, and they need external support. And every time we can support such an institution, that's a real brownie point. And most importantly, we want them to mature by themselves. So somebody asked me, what would success look like in a collaboration with an African university? And for me, success would look like when in 10 years they'd say, do you know what, we don't want to sign that deal with Cambridge anymore because we're going to go to Harvard. That means it would have achieved the maturity as an independent institution and therefore can join the panoply of universities in the world. And I'm really proud that we've really set this on a real direction. And in a similar way, our interactions with India have also set the university on a very global agenda. So the international agenda would work. The big disappointment to me has to be Brexit, that while we're trying to get very international, we become more isolationist as an island, and that's a personal disappointment.
And then any more? Yeah, Hannah.
Earlier this year, students voted to keep the class list, but with an easier opt-out system. But obviously this hasn't been implemented this year. They're still being displayed as normal. I was just wondering what the attitude amongst the university administration is towards class lists, and whether you see an easier opt-out system being implemented in the near future, or is it something that will take a longer time?
Personally, this was a matter that we left very much with the student body. The line that the university took at all times was that class lists are really a decision for students, just as wearing gowns or whatever is a matter. It's not something the university is going to get itself particularly involved in. What does matter, though, it does matter that if people want to opt out, it is reasonably easy to do so out of the class list system. The debates clearly at the end of the day resulted in the class list remaining, and I'm a bit disappointed if people are finding it difficult to opt out of the class list. Certainly we'll take that back and we'll look to see if we can improve the opt-out system.
So one of the things that I think was most interesting in the class list debate was the relationship that KUSU either claimed to have or didn't have with the university, and how when the university was remaining neutral, but the student union had a very particular angle on that. So I think more generally though, how do you see the relationship between the other union in Cambridge and the university administration being, and sort of how do you think that's going to develop in the future?
Well, we have a very complex relationship with the whole student body here in Cambridge, because KUSU it does represent in many ways the university as a whole, but then in every college we have the JCRs and MCRs with particular views that they would like to espouse, and periodically there seems to be this turmoil of affiliation or non-affiliation with KUSU. However, we are duty-bound to seek advice from the most representative student body, and KUSU is that body because it does seek to represent the vast majority. What is good is that KUSU is trying to be as democratic as possible, and in trying to involve as many students in the decisions and the way in which it represents the university, and that is a good thing. The graduate union is one that I would hope might develop, and with the increasing number of graduate students, to just recognize how important their role is as an interlocutor in the debates between the colleges and the university, bearing in mind how much of the graduate fee now goes to the colleges, and that therefore the graduate union should be standing for the graduate students' rights and the facilities that they do have. As for our relationship with the union here, I think it's always been a very positive one in many ways. You invite incredibly interesting people. The discussions are very interesting indeed. And the only thing I really do look forward to is when I do finish in this role in September, we've decided to stay in Cambridge, and maybe I'll be able to take my seat over there and listen to more of the debates than I've been able to.
Well, we look I'm sure Paige, who's our new president, sat in the corner over there, would be absolutely delighted to welcome you. And there's just one thing you said there, which has always been one of the real mystery questions that I've got about the university, to go back to the word in the term card. So you'll excuse me for asking it. You mentioned that the university is aware of the rather fraught, occasionally, relationship between KUSU and the JCRs and everything like that. This leads me to one of my bigger questions. Do the senior university administration read like the TAB or TCS or Varsity or any of the student papers? Like, are you aware of like the gossip and sort of what the students care about, or do you keep yourselves to sort of a higher standard of journalism, if one could ever exist, noting the number of former TAB editors in the room right now?
I think the answer to that is the answer I would give you, that we used to notice on the ward rounds in hospitals when we used to go round. Everybody said, yes, of course, we would read The Guardian or The Times, but when you stood at the bottom end of the patient's bed, everybody flipped into The Sun as it was lying there. So the truth is all journalism is always of interest to anyone, and they will deny that they look at it, but I dare say if a copy's lying around, they'll flip into it to see what is actually happening. So student journalism is an important part of the democratic process that we have here. Believe me, at times you can say, God, why are they writing about that? But it is the importance of the third estate, as far as I'm concerned, in any structure, and long may they continue and survive.
Well, as with the Donald, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. There could well be some people in the university administration that read the TAB, he says under his breath. Any other questions? Yes, back there.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Vice-Chancellor, for coming to speak to us this evening. My question is really about the collegiate nature of the university, and it seems that from time to time there is some sort of inquiry or scandal that pops up in the student media with discrepancies, for example, between colleges, intermission being the big one at the moment. And there are probably people amongst the student body that have the opinion, and it's not one I share, but they have the opinion that possibly the collegiate system is completely out of date. Do you think that these sort of college discrepancies are sort of problematic, or are they just sort of the just a sort of natural consequence, I suppose, of federalism within the university?
Well, I think they're the consequence of federalism, but to really understand this, you have to understand the relationship between the colleges and the university at a high level. The best way that I can describe it is we are more indissoluble than marriage ever is. Because at the end of the day, the best way of thinking about the colleges and the university is we're conjoined twins, or Siamese twins, as you would have. But more importantly than that, we're Siamese twins that are conjoined at the heart. And if there's one organ you can't split into, it's the heart. And the reason is very simple. We cannot admit students, graduate or undergraduate, to the university without partnership with the colleges. The colleges cannot grant degrees. So whether we like it or not, we are actually linked. There are 31 colleges. They're all independent institutions and therefore have their own rules and regulations. They're independently governed charities under the Charity Commission, and we work with them. But the university sets overall rules for the university, but within the college, the rules that govern are the college rules and as many of the university rules as they wish to take. The fellowship of colleges and the councils of colleges are quite free to adapt or utilize what the university dictates. I cannot, and nor can the university, nor the university council, dictate, for example, to the Council of Christ or the Council of Kings or of any other college. There are, however, appeal mechanisms where there is a real problem or issue that arises that allows us to call in common structures that allow this to take forward. And here, one of the most interesting things about Cambridge is that the Vice-Chancellor plays no part in disciplinary or prosecution matters whatsoever within the university. We have a commissary, and all I can do is to ask to refer a matter to the commissary, who takes an independent view through a reading of the statutes and ordinances of the university. And the colleges have access to these systems as well. So yes, it's a more complex system than elsewhere. But let me turn that around to you the other way. I'm very pleased that we have a collegiate system, and I'm going to suggest to you that for the future, it's the collegiate system and the unique selling point of the collegiate system that will stand us in better stead than the structures that are elsewhere. Yes, it's expensive, but if you cast your mind going forward to 10, 15 years, you're going to have technologies that are going to capture most of the formal education that you would get in lecture theatres and elsewhere. Some of it will be in the format of MOOC, some of it will be in real-time testing. And I've been challenged time and again, what will Cambridge, how we will respond? And my answer is, the strength is the supervision system that is embedded in the colleges. Because if you happen to read, I don't know, multidimensional geometry, 001, 002, 003, and you read the Stanford lectures and you have the MIT lectures, and they kind of said, well, it'll all be on edX, so what are you going to teach? And my response was very simple. What we will always do in Cambridge is to be teaching 004, 005, and 006, because that's what individual supervision and group supervision allows you to do that other institutions can't. Yes, it's expensive. In some ways, you may consider it educationally privileged, but the consequence is, for those who are best able to take advantage of the system, I think it will continue to future-proof the university going forward. So I'm a big fan of it, even though I did not benefit from it directly, either as an undergraduate or a postgraduate, but have enjoyed engaging with it and teaching in it.
Fantastic. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, so just on the topic of Brexit, I was wondering if there is anything the university is doing or the university could do to sort of reassure and encourage prospective students from European countries at this time of uncertainty?
Yeah, it's probably, it's a huge time of uncertainty for many EU nationals, and it's uncertainty that I do wish our government would put into abeyance. You know, there are three things that, well, let's start again. I mean, I was very firmly in the Remain camp, very visibly so, and as was the university, as were the 165 universities in the United Kingdom. So we were very firmly to one end. The referendum decided otherwise. So what is it that we're looking for now as the negotiations start with Brexit? The three main themes that we really want. The first of these is mobility of talent. We need the capacity for students to exchange with countries on the continent of Europe. We need the capacity for graduates to be able to cross those boundaries very easily, because at the end of the day, education and research are international. They don't recognize the boundaries of individual countries. And everyone talks about this as being of huge benefit to European students coming to Britain. We keep forgetting 125,000 British students leave for the continent of Europe under Erasmus programs. So, number one, mobility of talent. The second is that we have to recognize the role and give confidence to all of our friends and colleagues who come from countries of the European Union that they may be nationals of those countries, but that we want them to stay in Britain. We want them to be fully engaged. This is a cosmopolitan, open, and very democratic country that I'm very proud to be part of, my parents having come here as refugees. And I'm very proud of Britain, and I don't like this mentality of Little Britain, or in some way holding EU nationals here as hostages against some sort of trade deal with the UK. I believe we should take the moral high ground and say, look, these people are really valued here. We want them to come here. And then last but not least are the research collaborations. What we will lose with Brexit if we're not careful are the fantastic collaborations we have with colleagues in the other 27 countries of the European Union. And it is vital, and it's interesting that even Theresa May recognized in a speech at Lancaster House that these collaborations must be supported, and that she would be looking for as close and as good a deal as she could do in order to sustain some of these activities. And as a university, these three issues are the three fundamental issues that you'll be hearing a lot more from us in the future. And yes, I would like every single EU national, and frankly anyone who's come from overseas at all, to live in this city and to work in this university, to feel wanted and really engaged, and to be absolutely part of the fantastic cosmopolitan community we have. That's what I would really like to aspire to. Tragically, I don't think we're there yet.
And then any other questions? Yes, here again.
Thank you. Sorry, this is a slightly, well, it's definitely not a serious question in comparison to some of the others, but just talking about the interconnectedness between the university and the collegiate university, it reminded me of an article that appeared in one of the student papers whilst I was a student about what would happen if all of the colleges went to war with one another and who would come out on top, based on geography, whether geographical advantages or disadvantages, whether there be potential alliances between colleges. If, say, hypothetically, the colleges decided to go to war with one another, who would you place your bets on and why? Either a college or a potential alliance of colleges.
Free debate since 1815, people.
That's a very interesting concept. Well, of course, I'm far from unbiased. I think the winner at the end of the day would be Wolfson, because we're the furthest out of the area, and secondly, because it's my college, I would ensure that that actually did happen. And while the centre was obliterated, it would be the graduate college that would stand out aloof at the end of the day. And an alliance of graduate colleges actually seeking to drive Cambridge while the others squabble away and squander away their resources, it would happen. The good news is, I don't think that scenario would ever take place here. The reason being that the vested interest of actually working together and the genuine sense among the colleges. I'm always asked the question, how on earth can you work with 31 heads of house? And my response is, they're brilliant. I've got, instead of one person speaking for Cambridge, we've got 32 people speaking for Cambridge, all of whom are hugely influential. And the colleges, therefore, do a fantastic job, and they support each other. Well, that's a hidden thing that very often, as fellows or as members in a college community, we don't realize. But the bursars work overtime to make sure that there is support for colleges, the richer to the poorer. You know, Trinity, yes, it is the richest, but it does an awful lot to ensure that the collegiate system can survive. So it's a sort of, maybe it's not politically correct to refer to it as a self-serving academic commune, but maybe that's what Cambridge really is. Maybe in the Parisian, not in the Stalinist sense.
And the grads shall inherit the earth. Do you have any other questions? Yeah, over here.
During the time that you've been in Cambridge, what were like the biggest fires that you encountered, or the biggest problems that we didn't speak about yet? Things that kept you awake at night, or things that you were not wondering how to solve them at all?
I think the one that challenged me was actually within the first few months of starting here, with the sudden increase in student fees. All of the anxieties that it raised. In my mind, it wasn't so much the loans and areas, because we knew that was going to be more of a long-term problem of indebtedness of students, having seen what's happening in the United States in this area. But what particularly bothers me is the impact that this has on students from backgrounds that can't afford to do that. You know, look, I'm reasonably well paid as Vice-Chancellor. If my daughters wanted to go on a master's course in order to further their career, that would be possible. If my father would not have been able to pay for me to attend a master's course, therefore it created inequalities. And that caused a lot of debate in that first year as to how best to handle this. And the solution was very much to say that, look, there has to be a balance between the benefit to the student and the benefit to society. And overall, at that time, we felt that it was important that a balance was achieved between the two, and ultimately that balance had to be decided electorally as to what was right and appropriate. And that still remains an anxiety on my part as to, particularly around student indebtedness, because you know, however much you play it, the bottom line is it is an encumbrance on people when they have debt at the start of their careers. And it might constrain them, and I wouldn't want to see them constrained in spreading their wings and looking to do great things in the future. Other issues, the falling value of the pensions facility. You may not be aware, but the whole of UIS pension, the whole of USS, the pension scheme for all employees, is underwritten by Cambridge and Oxford to an extent, and we're the last two men standing in that particular structure. So if the whole thing goes belly up in some way, we have to find the resources to prop up all the pensions. And as I will soon be in receipt of one of those, I'm going to be looking as to the finances of Cambridge University with a very eagle eye in the future.
So the question, I guess, regarding student indebtedness then is, when the Labour Party put into its manifesto that it would erase the concept of student debt and of fees, is that something that the university looked to with sort of great anticipation, and that potentially that could be a policy of government, or do you think that that is something that in itself is fraught with other issues?
Of all the policies that they put forward, I'd have to say it was the least well thought through policy. In fact, one might even, although I might look more kindly on it as it came from that particular area, as little short of a bribe. The reason was we were given no indication of where that resource was going to come. We were not given any indication what the scale would be of the return in September. There was no information whatsoever. It was a shot to nothing. And yet we had to find 11 billion somewhere to cover that particular area. So it's a great policy. So now what are the options? What are the alternatives that you look for? A graduate tax? Graduate tax gets paid back to the university in retrospect. So the very person who's then paying the graduate tax has not benefited from anything that the tax has. We do not have the resources to forward invest and then to recoup back in 10, 15 years' time when a graduate tax can actually return it. So when we started to look at the alternatives to the student loan, they don't look particularly palatable for either the student or for the university. And it breaks that linkage between the university and the alumnus from that university very quickly if it's just paid into a pool. So graduate taxation has a real problem. Oddly enough, there was a report in 2003, then commissioned by Tony Blair, which actually identified all of these issues and why all the debate has been, how do you actually make a graduate tax fair, timely and equitable? Either the government has to borrow an awful lot of money to forward pay universities and then recoup the money themselves. That is not that easy to do. So I didn't think it was a policy that was very well thought through and certainly was totally lacking in detail. And it was a policy that would cause me considerable anxiety, not so much because of the principle, but actually the practicality and the operational practicalities. How was this going to be enacted in September without derailing all the finances of every university and every higher education institution in the country?
So is it, not maybe scary is the wrong word, but is it certainly interesting sometimes to open the paper in the morning and to see things like that and to have to think, what's the university's response to that going to be, for example?
I think that what I've learned in this role and many others before is that what you read in today's newspapers are tomorrow's chip paper. So I don't listen too much and read rather skeptically now rather than falling over a particular individual headline. What's more important is the sort of debate and discussion that follows on from many of these stark announcements, and then being able to work through, some of which may be good ideas, to put them into practice in such a way that the vast majority can benefit. So I'm afraid headlines don't quite do it for me.
Excellent. And I think we had another question here. Just down here.
I would like to ask you how you feel that the appointed vice-chancellorship has changed things from the rotating vice-chancellorship, which was in force obviously when I was an undergraduate. What do you think the advantages and disadvantages are?
Yes, an interesting question. I think there is no option but to give the Vice-Chancellor a considerable period of time. The real weakness of the rotating Vice-Chancellorship was evident in the WAS report, which was, it was a 2-year position. It was honorific. You shook hands with the great and the good who came through as the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Cambridge. But in reality, what the WAS report did recognize at the time was that you have an institution which had fundamentally changed. You remember in the 1980s, the government would directly give money for students to colleges rather than the university, but that changed considerably. And that means that the turnover that a university now has is 1.6 billion sterling per annum. That's the turnover that you have to deal with. As Chief Accounting Officer for the university, I have to account for that and to make sure that it's run. You cannot ensure that you've got proper scrutiny and supervision of an organization if you do it and rotate somebody on a 2-year basis into the area. So I'm afraid it's an inevitability, and I suspect one of the real questions the university will have to think about in the future is whether 7 years is the right term or whether it should be longer, because philanthropy will become more important and most campaigns will be run over 7 to 10 years and you've got to have a lead-in time to them. So if you are going to continue major philanthropic drives, one of the biggest disruption to philanthropy is where there is a transition from one vice-chancellor to the next, and that is something that we can manage, but it doesn't make it any easier. So I think the deed is done as far as the rotating vice-chancellorship, and in today's world, I think it is very much an advantage to have an appointed vice-chancellor.
And then I think we've probably got time for one more question. I think Paige might have had one, so we'll go back there.
I just wanted to ask about something that is relevant to the university, and also the union is often a focal point for this, that Cambridge is steeped in tradition. Mm-hmm. You've spoken about some of the benefits of that, such as the collegiate system, but you've also spoken about some of the ways that the university has modernized in the way, for example, with the Cambridge in Africa initiative, or how it is looking forward. Do you think that the university has too much tradition and that is something that should change, or at least it is something we should be more critical of?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, I'm going to answer this as a biologist. If you've been around for 800 years and you don't evolve, you die. The amazing resilience of Cambridge over an 800-year history stands in its own good stead. I mean, you think of Reformation, Counter-Reformation, and Reformation again. Okay, there was a lot of incineration going on outside of Cambridge and elsewhere, and individuals suffered. But the university came out of that stronger. It came through civil wars, world wars, and elsewhere. And it's been able to retain that area, so that you've got to understand that within institutions there is this strength of resilience of being able to withstand shocks that are externally placed on you. But over and above that, the university has been able to move on from a situation where it merely trained administrators and clerics for the medieval church and state, to actually having the first laboratories, to have 96 Nobel Prize winners, to structures of DNA, to now having the most vibrant support of a wide economy that surrounds the Cambridge, in the Cambridge phenomenon. I mean, let's be clear, that's 4,500 companies are actually involved in that, 60,000 jobs created, and bringing in more money to the exchequer at the moment than Rolls-Royce is bringing in. You know, all that happens because of innovation and change. But what I like about Cambridge in particular, it has a foundation of tradition which gives it the resilience, but this amazing academic entrepreneurship, and I do mean academic, it's not just entrepreneurship for making money, it's this entrepreneurship in all sorts of areas of academe that then builds on top of that process. And much like the accumulations that you get when you get sandstone layers laid down, it becomes stone over time. And we keep the very best of it, lose the worst of it, and we keep going onwards and upwards. And that's what I'd wish for Cambridge in the future. Don't lose the tradition, but remember what it is. It's a foundation, and the building you build on it is built on individualism, it's built on the entrepreneurship of the university, and it's built on looking to the future, not to the past.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And indeed, thank you so much for coming to speak to us today, Vice-Chancellor. It's been a real pleasure. Looking ahead to the week at the Union, we have tomorrow joining us in the evening Gina Miller, the noted businesswoman and driving force behind our Miller and Santos versus Secretary of State for the exiting of the European Union. What is no doubt going to be one of our more incendiary talks, I imagine, in light of Thursday's events of the term so far. That's going to be absolutely fantastic. She'll be joining us from around 6 in the evening. That event will also sort of join in with the hustings that we're having for the union's elections that are coming up on Monday. And then after that on Thursday, we have our final debate of term, which is on the topic, again, fortuitous given we didn't even know there was going to be an election. This House believes Britain is not great. Speaking on the proposition, we'll have Peter Hitchens and Godfrey Bloom. It'll be really exciting, and speaking against them will be in union tradition, as it's my final debate as president myself. I'm looking forward to getting absolutely trashed by Peter Hitchens. If there was a way of doing a golf handicap for debates, I think I'd be on 28 and he'd be playing off scratch, but it should be good fun. And really then that's kind of it, apart from a few other events later on, which we'll publicise in due course. That's really it from us at the Union. So a massive round of applause for the Vice-Chancellor. Thank you so much for coming.
Pleasure. Thank you.
A real pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you.
walk away with them.